Snow has a sound when it means to kill you, thin, brittle, whispering like teeth. Anyone with sense stayed behind the pressure doors and pretended the outside world was just a white rumor. I did not have sense. I had a scratched map on a plastic tray, a radio that hissed, 5 frantic blue dots blinking on my wrist, cubs trapped under the ridge, their signals wobbling like frightened heartbeats. They weren't my cubs. The Kettleback clan barely tolerated humans unless we were trading spare parts for their moss tea cakes, and even then they watched our hands. But the colony had laws written by grief, and one said we rescue children even from families that vote against our heir. I signed that law with a coffee stain 2 years ago. The storm didn't care, but laws have long memories and I am bad at ignoring them. Ever tried not doing this? Joe asked in my ear. She was in monitoring where coffee sometimes tasted like coffee. The heaters hummed in smug harmony. Tried once, I said, hauling the rescue sled into the gale. Got bored. Storms at 92. That's crawl and pray weather. Copy, I said and walked. Spindrift curled off the ice like smoke from a witch's pan, and the sky was a steel sheet that had forgotten what a sun looked like. The sled found the ridge groove by habit. I clipped my harness to the rail, leaned into the wind, counted breaths to keep time with the dots on my wrist. They bunched, scattered, bunched again. Cubs clump when they're scared. They scatter when the ice groans. I wanted clumping. The first marker pole flashed and vanished as the storm rearranged the scenery. We were close. The Kettlebacks dig dens in the lee of ice boulders, lining hollows with moss that steams when you breathe on it. Smart design. Safe, unless the wind finds a funnel and turns warmth into a vacuum. The mother's last ping said they'd moved under a white arch. Patch me to her, I said. Patch, Joe said, all capitals to make me feel better about translation lag. The mother's voice came as chime notes my wrist rendered into words. You are late. I am alive. I sang back badly. The app needs seed tones. Your cub's markers flicker. New den? Storm broke the old. New hollow under the second white arch, where the sky tastes of iron. I looked up and tasted nothing but cold. Still, I knew the arches, glacier waves the wind had thinned along their backs. If you were foolish you walked beneath and called it a cathedral. If you were practical you gave them 100 meters and polite thoughts. If you were me, you aimed a rescue sled at their shadow because 5 blue dots were already there. Seismic snaps at the arches, Joe said. You go under your paste. Noted, I said, clipping a second tether for the kind of decision that makes managers chew thumbs. The trick with arches is reading drift. The wind paints dunes with small sharp ridges where it likes avalanches and soft rounded backs where it tolerates whispers. I stepped where the world agreed to whisper about my weight. The dots stabilized. Stillness meant they'd stopped panicking. It also meant cold had put a claim on them. Can you sing to them? I asked the mother. They have their father's ears. She sang, which in Kettleback means yes with knives in the throat. She began a line of notes like glass bells wrapped in felt. My translator sulked and threw up, unmapped tone, brackets. The cub's dots pulsed brighter. I pictured 5 otterish bodies pressed together in a moss-lined pocket, whiskers frosted, noses pinking from cold, eyes too big for such a white day. The arch revealed itself when the storm tore its veil for a heartbeat. Not the biggest I'd seen, but tired, blue-bruised below, trailing threads of frost in a continuous fall. Wind blew through it like a bottle flute. That was the mother's cathedral. I told Joe to lock the sled and went to 3 lines. It's your skeleton, she muttered. I'm very fond of it, I said and went low. Under the arch, the world scolded. The ground tone changed from well-deep ice to taut drumskin snow. I slid the heat probe beneath the crust. Push, hold, melt, withdraw. 3-second melt, Joe said. Any longer and you compromise the lip. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. I counted, and Snow sighed as if relieved someone had said something sensible. A hole widened from fist to 2 fists to a mouth. Warm air ghosted my visor, carrying moss anther smell and a breathless chatter that required no translator. I've got them, I said, throat tight. The pocket was small and carefully built. 5 cubs had made a heap of themselves, striped whiskers iced into tragic curls, one ear on the smallest stuck to his cheek. He sneezed, unglued it, and glared at me as if I were the weather. I had a cloth sling bucket for lifts, a winch line to the sled, and a problem: cubs hate buckets, and the arch had begun to add impatient creaks to its vocabulary. Monotony protocol, I told Joe. Boring them out? You monster. But she spun up the loop, soft, persistently dull tones designed by sleep scientists and desperate teachers. I piped it into the den. The cub's ears did a synchronized tilt. The smallest yawned so hard he forgot to be offended. Mother's song, I said, and she laid her melody over the metronome like a quilt. No one tells you what to do with your hands when a creature hands you its trust. You take it gently. You don't drop it. You pretend you deserve it. I slid an arm in and gathered the smallest into the sling. He weighed less than a kettle of soup and smelled faintly of moss tea. That was 1. 4 to go. The arch popped, a knuckle with ambition. The dune beside me slithered in a lazy shrug, carving a lip across my retreat. Under that lip was nothing. Hold, I whispered to physics, and took 2 at once, eased them into the sling while the wind shoved like a drunk in a crowd. They made sleepy vowels and went right back to dreaming. 3 became 4, 4 became 5. The sling sagged like a shopping bag full of warm bread. I thumbed the winch and the bundle rose, slow and steady, while I inched backward like a letter being pulled from a tight envelope. A little paw popped out to swat the gale, failed, and retreated with wounded dignity. I have them, I said, and only then noticed my teeth knocking. Warm pack on your neck, hero, Joe breathed. I slapped the gel where the suit's haptics flashed, and heat ran down my spine like mercy. The arch sounded worse. The mouth of the pocket had widened by a hair. The wind now played the stone like badly tuned organ pipes. We needed to leave. Between me and the sled, the dune finished its bad idea and sloughed. Not an avalanche, no thunder, but an ugly sideways slide that rode a new cornice across my path. I froze, laughed at the literal accuracy of that reaction, and leaned into the harness to become heavier than my fear. The cubs swung. They always swing. I pretended to be a tree, not a bell. Storm trending to 95, Joe said, apologizing with numbers. Copy, I said, right as my left cramp kissed emptiness. There's always a moment before you fall where you glimpse the other timeline in which you stayed warm and 5 blue dots first scattered then stilled. I hate that timeline. I carry an allergy to it like extra skin. So I made a third choice, clipped my emergency line to the sled rail, let my feet go where the snow wanted while my hips stayed promised to the rope, and let the harness yank my bad ideas back into alignment. Pain flared like a struck match. The cubs slept through it, because of course they did. I hung there, not falling, not safe, the arch above muttering collapse, the hollow behind sighing like it wanted to be a tunnel. Wind needled my visor seam and whistled rude comments through my helmet ports. On my wrist, 5 blue dots pulsed steady and small. Introductions belong here, I thought, on the exact edge of the thin place, at the moment you finally admit how badly you want everyone to make it home. Mother, I said over the wind. I have them all. Her answer hit behind my sternum without words, the sound a body recognizes even when translators fail. For a heartbeat, the storm felt like a chorus holding its breath. Then the ice groaned again, impatient with sentiment. Coming home, I said to no one and everyone, and braced to do something clever, or stupid, or both, whatever the weather would allow and the cubs would forgive. If the ground is going to break your heart, make it fall for you first. I told the rope I was charming, told the cornice I was boring, and told the arch that collapsing before an audience of children was tacky. The mesh cradle with 5 kettleback cubs bobbed above me like a string of sleepy lanterns. Update, Joe said in my ear, steady in the way of people who are afraid on purpose. Soft patch to your left, harder line 2 meters right. Storms at 94. That's the setting where the weather writes its own obituary and asks you to sign. Send it my regards, I said, easing my right boot until the snow under it answered with a good, dull sound. Feeding slack? Federal Mother says if you drop them, she will argue with your gods until they send you back to fix it. Noted. I slid my weight, hips first because hips tell truth, and the lines sang a taut little note that meant physics and prayer had reached a handshake. The air went metallic. Peniantum. A vent opening somewhere nearby inhaled the storm and exhaled a new wind that didn't belong to this valley. Snow under my left foot settled a fraction. The drift ahead puffed like a proud actor. Crevasse party, Joe said. Guest list includes you if you keep walking straight. Declining with regret. I stopped. The sling tugged. The lip widened by a finger's arrogance. Unacceptable. Microbridge, I said. Brace across the mouth, sling resting on it, one clean plank for me. Keep the slack honest. Your clean plank has a hairline on the far third, Joe said. It's shy, not broken. I lied, and slid the carbon brace from the sled's side. I levered the near end against the closed lip, swung the far end until it kissed ice, and listened to it complain before it decided I knew what I was doing. The cub squeaked. I lowered the sling until the mesh rested on the brace like a hammock held up by two patient fists. The plank bowed beneath my testing boot. I breathed the mother's melody on a 4-count and stepped. Blue Depth wanted me. I told it later. The other side caught me with the courtesy of rough snow. I hauled the cradle across, cooed a nonsense apology, and felt my pulse climb down from its tree. We edged along the ridge shoulder until the arch's fetch stopped trying to adopt us. For a breath we were a working machine. Then the sled's runner hit polished ice and attempted artistry. The cradle tilted. 5 small bodies slid in one soft panic. I threw my chest across the lip, kicked the opposite way, and let the harness cut me into 2 honest halves. The sled spun, jammed its nose in a drift, and froze. I kept sliding for the length of a bad idea, then stopped with snow up my sleeves and dignity somewhere behind me. Slapstick logged, Joe said. If you do it again, I'm charging admission. The cubs get my cut, I said, resetting the runner. The smallest peered at me over the mesh, eyes too large to forgive. I saluted him with 2 fingers and moved. The path flags appeared, bright, stubborn, punching color through white noise. I clipped the sled to the rail and to myself. The storm pushed. I pushed back. The mother's song softened. They drowse, she said. The smallest dreams of stealing moss. I'll put contraband in the cradle when we get home, I said, and she made the please chime that means a plan is wicked in the right ways. At the big switchback the sled's front latch tore with a sound that made everyone in my ancestry wince. The cradle's nose sagged. Gravity returned to its work with professional enthusiasm. I dove, wrapped the cradle, and sat down hard into my harness while the path rail decided whether to love me enough today. Fix, I gasped. Utility cord, Joe said. Figure 8 Marshall hitch, 3 turns through the lower realm. Overbuild until you feel silly. I tied the silliest knot I have ever loved. The smallest cub planted his paw on my wrist as if to cosign. We moved again, slower, smarter. The wind lost a note. The cold lost an edge. The radios died without drama. One breath, I had Joe's voice, the mother's music, the sled's telemetry. The next, nothing but wind. The silence turned sharp. The repeater was down. My backup antenna could sing to a wall, and the wall would harmonize better. I walked. Stopping is a decision that sometimes decides you. Flags leaned in the same direction. In the quiet I heard the ridge shudder, water thrumming under ice, tiny claws ticking in sleep. The drift ahead looked eager in the wrong way, puffy, theatrical. I knelt, pressed a glove to it, and felt hollow laughter beneath. Cornice. The honest line bent away into a traverse above jumbled blue. The idiot line continued. I needed a third line. Okay, I told the cubs, because plans work better if explained to someone small. We're going to make a snow zipper. The avalanche saw is a ribbon of teeth. I cut a chevron into the drift, narrow at the top, wide at the base. The wind tried to sew it shut. I asked it to wait. I tugged the sled line just so, and the chevron winked loose and slid away with a hush, revealing denser, older snow willing to be believed. 2 short planks made a dock for the runners. The sled settled onto them with a grateful little sigh. With radios dead, I reported anyway. Zipper worked. Temporarily not doomed. The ridge answered with a new rhythm, distant and large, like booths trying to be polite. Not tracks. Water. The glacier cleared its throat in a language that makes architects drink. We had to move. I pulled. The sled hopped the last lip like a brave dog, skidded, found the groove, and we were moving again through a world shifting under our feet. The pressure doors finally showed themselves, 3 amber rectangles in a wall of screaming white, warm as bread. The last rise felt like a mountain. I took it 1 step at a time because lies live in skipped meters. The outer doors hissed open and the wind tried to come in with us. The lock told it no. I shoved the sled through, slapped the panel, and leaned against the wall while the world outside pounded its grievances on tempered glass. Lights warmed. The inner doors opened, and warmth hit hard. Hands took the sled. Blankets arrived. The warming cabinet yawned its notorious sock breath. The cubs protested the insult, protested again, and then melted into heat. I stood there and let my shakes finish their sentence. Joe came out of monitoring with a grin. "You look like a snowman who owes me money," she said and hugged me. "Consider yourself repaid in drama," I said. "Repeater's down. Arch is sulking. Vent is new. All fixable," she said, and then added softer, "Nice work." The kettleback mother arrived in bells and steam, fur rhymed, eyes huge. Their gratitude is a ceremony. Count to 5, insult the cabinet, scold the blankets, then nod once to the rescuer like the signing of a careful treaty. I watched from the polite distance humans keep when we want to belong without pretending we already do. She counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Her shoulders loosened. She turned her head toward me but did not quite look. That would come later or not. Her song shifted key, still private, but with a thread meant for strangers to follow. My throat tightened in the way that has nothing to do with cold. We were inside, which is not the same as safe. The ridge would move, the arch would choose a day to forget its shape, the vent would open its argument, the repeater would be patched, and then replaced, and then redesigned after someone wrote a report with coffee on its corner. The law with my stain on it would feel heavier and easier both. 5 cubs would learn warm mischief. I would pretend sleep, then find it. "Debrief in 10, Joe said, because victory is a meeting. I nodded because survival is paperwork. The lights flickered twice. Somewhere under our boots the glacier made a long, rolling statement in the language of slow things, and everyone in the room looked at everyone else as if we had all just remembered we were not done with the day. Then, as the cabinet clicked shut and steam ghosted from wet fur, the floor delivered a long, patient rumble like a train passing beneath a city that forgot it had tracks. Cups shivered. The door seals sighed. A hairline crack ran across a frost pane and stopped, thinking. Every voice fell quiet at once. We all listened, counting. The storm answered with pressure. ChatGPT said. The crack in the frost pane was thin enough to miss if you blinked, but no one did. It ran like a compass needle pointed somewhere outside, toward the ridge. The glacier's voice followed, long, low, and almost amused, as though it had been watching us the whole time and was finally ready to say its piece. Joe's voice cut the hush. That wasn't just the arch. The mother's ears twitched backward. The storm is chewing the white arches into dust, she said, her translator turning the musical words into hard syllables. When they fall, the wind will rush through the ridge channel. Your walls are not built for that song. Her gaze flicked to the cubs. All 5 were tucked in a huddle, steam rising from their fur, but their ears twitched to sounds only they could hear. I knew that look, animals catching frequencies the human ear files under imagination. The pressure doors groaned. The storm's howl found a deeper register, one I'd only heard once before, during the collapse of the West Drift 2 years ago. That time, 3 cabins and a storehouse went under before anyone had a chance to rescue so much as a spoon. Joe was already moving. Rescue sleds still out there, harness intact? Secured in the lock? I said. Good. You're going back. It didn't make sense at first. Back? Everyone's inside. You saw me bring them in. Her tablet lit with a seismic overlay, amber and red streaks across a blue schematic of the ridge. These channels weren't open before. The arch collapses, venting into the older ice. If the pressure pops the wrong seam, it'll bury the southern huts. The Kettleback's elder hall is down there. The mother was already standing, her steam-warmed fur turning to frost again in the open air. Our oldest will not move fast, she said. They trust the ridge to hold them. I glanced at the cubs, then at her. You're not going back out there. Then you will, she said simply, and in her language, that wasn't an insult, it was a verdict. The lock hissed behind me like it knew I was making bad choices again. The wind had only gotten meaner. It shoved in bursts, like a drunk with something to prove, and the snow had gone sharp, small ice beads stinging the visor like thrown sand. The path was gone. Flags lay snap, bent to the storm's will. I followed the ghost of my own earlier track where it hadn't already been erased. The tether line shivered in my grip as the ridge underfoot shifted, almost imperceptibly. The first white arch came into view, what was left of it. It had snapped midspan, one arm still stabbing upward while the other lay in a jagged heap that the storm was already trying to bury. The hollow where the cubs had been was gone, swallowed clean. It hit me harder than it should have, seeing the place so utterly erased, as if it had never held life at all. The ridge beyond the arch was alive in the worst way, surface snow rippling like muscle under skin, cracks snaking outward faster than my eyes could follow. Somewhere deep below, meltwater rivers were rearranging the world without asking permission. I switched to crampons and went low, spidering across the brittle crust toward the southern drop. Joe's voice punched through the static. Reading a sheer fracture about 20 meters ahead. Looks thin enough for you to jump. I hated when she was right. The crack was narrow, black, and humming faintly. Snowflakes didn't land on its edges. They got sucked down and vanished into the dark. I coiled the tether, took 3 steps back, and jumped. The harness caught the wind midair, yanking me sideways, but my landing crampon bit and held. Beyond the sheer was the lip of the southern slope. Even in wideout, I could see the faint darker mass where the elder hall's roof was half buried. It looked like it had been pushed sideways a few degrees, a bad sign. The wind funneled here, screaming through unseen vents, the pitch climbing towards something dangerous. I hit the comms. Elder hall in sight. Structure stressed. They've got maybe minutes before. The sound hit then, a deep, concussive warmth that I felt in my bones. Snow erupted from the slope above the hall, pouring down in a fast, churning slide. The avalanche wasn't huge by mountain standards, but it didn't need to be. The hall's walls were already compromised. I ran. The slope was a patchwork of hardpack and powder. I zigzagged to keep from punching through, the tether line dragging behind me like a stubborn snake. The hall's front drifted into view just as the first wave of snow slammed against it. The front wall bowed, groaned. The elders were inside, 3 kettlebacks old enough to have seen the first humans set foot in their valley. One of them was standing in the doorway, stubborn as bedrock, refusing to abandon a home that had stood longer than I'd been alive. I didn't slow down. I slammed into the drift, grabbed him around the middle, and yanked him backward. He hissed something that probably meant, fool, but didn't resist. Another elder appeared in the doorway, half buried already. I dragged them both to the sled's platform, shoved them down, and clipped them in. The third was still inside. The hall gave another groan and the roof dumped a fresh load of snow through a new crack. I dove in. The last elder was seated against the far wall, legs stiff with cold, unable to stand. Their eyes were glassy, unfocused. I hooked my arms under theirs and pulled. The floor was already tilting. Snow poured through the cracks in the ceiling. I kicked the door frame for leverage and felt it give, just a hair, but enough to know we were out of time. One hard shove and we cleared the threshold. Outside, the other two elders had unhooked themselves from the sled and were trying to help pull their companion aboard. The wind chose that moment to find its full voice, shrieking down the ridge in a pitch so high it felt like it was vibrating my teeth. I realized with a jolt that the mother had been right. The collapse was creating a wind tunnel through the ridge channel, amplifying the storm's power. We lashed the last elder into the sled. I clipped myself to the harness, dug the crampons in, and started the pull uphill toward the ridge path. It was like dragging a building through wet cement, while the wind punched from every angle. The avalanche had spread its debris wide, so every step was a gamble on whether the ground would hold. Halfway up, the slope shifted under us with a rolling crack. The sled tilted. One of the elders slipped sideways in their harness. I lunged, grabbed the strap, and hauled it back just as the snow beneath the runners gave way. For a second, the whole sled hung tilted over a new void, the wind clawing at it. I dropped my weight backward, using my own tether as a counterbalance. The runners scraped back onto solid snow, and I didn't give them a chance to settle. I pulled like my bones were on fire, inch by inch, until we reached the comparative safety of the ridge shoulder. Behind us, the elder hall finally gave up and collapsed entirely, sending up a plume of snow that the storm immediately shredded. Nothing remained but a sagging mound in the slope. Joe's voice came back into my ear, rough with static. Seismic readings dropping. You're clear to return. Bring them in. The return was slower than I liked, but the ridge held. The collapsed arch was now a jagged memory. The vent's howling pitch dropped by degrees, as if the storm itself was tiring. When the pressure doors finally came into view again, amber light glowing through the white, I felt something in my chest ease for the first time since I'd stepped back outside. Inside the lock, warmth hit like a wall. The elders were unlashed and wrapped in blankets almost before the sled stopped moving. The cubs were there too, crowding close, their steam mixing with that of their elders, little noses checking that everyone was real. The mother met my gaze this time. No translation. No ceremony. Just a single, slow nod that said everything without words. It should have felt like the crisis was over. But somewhere deep beneath the ridge, the glacier made another long, thoughtful sound. And I knew we weren't done yet. ChatGPT said. The glacier's murmur didn't fade. It grew, a layered sound, part thunder, part grinding teeth, the kind of noise you feel in the soles of your boots before your ears catch up. The storm outside had lost some of its bite, but now the ground itself was the predator. Joe's tablet lit again, red bleeding across the seismic map. It's not pressure in the ridge anymore, she said, voice clipped. It's moving water. Big volume. If it vents into the valley, it'll take half the colony with it. The mother's ears flattened. The melt path runs under your warm walls, she said. If the old ice under them cracks, your shelter becomes your grave. Options? I asked. Joe's eyes flicked between me and the map. There's a choke point in the melt tunnel about 100 meters upslope. If we can plug it, redirect the flow into the eastern channel, it'll bypass us completely. I didn't need her to say what came next. The choke point was outside. Past the broken arch into the belly of the storm one more time. The elders were settled now, cubs curled against them like small furry shadows. The mother rose. My claws can dig where your tools slip. You will need me. You'll freeze, I said. So will you, she replied, and in her tone, it wasn't a warning, it was solidarity. The outside had gone from whiteout to something stranger, a kind of ghost world where the storm had thinned but the air was still full of shredded snow, swirling in spirals that twisted out of nowhere and vanished. The arch ruin loomed ahead like broken ribs. Beyond it, the slope dipped into a jagged bowl, the snow there sagging in an odd, concave way. That's your melt tunnel roof, Joe said in my ear. The choke point's under that bulge. Don't step on it unless you want a one-way trip into an ice river. I skirted the edge, probing with the rescue pole. The ground here was hollow, the vibrations coming up through the shaft a constant, rushing hiss. At the far side of the bulge, the mother was already digging, her claws throwing up arcs of snow and ice chips. Angle it so the flow breaks east, I called. She didn't look up, just kept carving, each strike of her forelimbs precise, deliberate. I dropped to my knees beside her and started in with the avalanche saw, cutting a trench from the bulge's side toward the eastern lip. The wind funneled past us, whispering in tones that made the hair on my neck stand up. The first crack came quick, a sharp pop under my palm as a fist-sized hole opened in the ice. A spray of frigid water shot up, soaking my glove to the wrist. I shoved a wedge of packed snow into it, forcing it to spit sideways instead of straight up. Good, Joe's voice came. You've got pressure to work with. Now open your channel. The mother and I worked in tandem, she breaking the stubborn crust, me slicing clean edges so the snow could be shaped. The trench deepened, widening toward the east. The hiss of water under the ice grew into a roar. When the break came, it came all at once, a muffled boom, then the whole eastern lip shuddered and dropped away, revealing a churning river of dark meltwater below. It surged into the trench we'd cut, vanishing down the eastern slope in a froth of spray and broken ice. For a moment, all I could do was watch it go, heart hammering. The sound of rushing water faded eastward, away from the colony. Joe's voice crackled in my ear. Seismic levels dropping fast. You did it. Flows redirected. The mother sat back on her haunches, snow plastered to her fur, steam rising from her breath. She looked at me for a long moment, then reached out and set one clawed paw gently against my forearm. A kettleback's version of "We are still here." The walk back felt different. The wind was still sharp, the snow still restless, but the ground under my boots no longer shifted with that unnerving, liquid roll. The pressure doors appeared through the haze like the promise of a story's final page. Inside, warmth and noise rushed in at once, cubs squealing as their mother returned, elders murmuring low songs that spoke of old winters survived. Joe was there, shaking her head with that half-grin she wore when someone had done something ridiculous, and somehow pulled it off. I stripped off the outer layer, the eyes still clinging to it in stubborn chunks, and finally let myself feel the bone-deep ache in every muscle. The mother was surrounded now, the cubs climbing over her, elders pressing their muzzles to her shoulders. She glanced up once, and this time, the nod she gave me was paired with the faintest curl of her mouth, an expression that might have been the kettleback equivalent of a smile. Joe handed me a mug of something hot and aggressively bitter. You know, she said, you could have stayed inside after the first rescue. Let the ridge take its chances. Yeah, I said, sipping. But then I'd have to live here with the ghosts. She didn't argue. The hum of heaters filled the silence for a moment, steady and reassuring. Out beyond the walls, the storm still moved across the ridge, reshaping it grain by grain. Tomorrow, or next week, or next month, there would be another crack, another collapse, another call to step into the cold. But for tonight, the arches had fallen, the river had turned, and everyone who'd gone out had come back. The smallest cub wandered over, dragging a scrap of moss in his teeth, and dropped it at my feet with a look that could only mean you promised. I laughed, broke the moss into 2 pieces, and handed one back. We were all still here. And that was enough.